Today is TP 101, or how we do in 2 hours what a Native American woman used to do in 20 minutes. Now, of course, they had experience running out the wazoo, and most of us do this once or twice in our lives. I happen to do it on a real regular basis. These are some of the pictures. This is one of the ones that I had put up at Catamount Institute. We were tying the tripod there. This is where we've got all our poles, and this is our finished product. Now, this teepee doesn't necessarily face east like everyone thinks they should. That's more for just for the view. Just for the view. It's not necessary. Uh, a beautiful teepee is like a good mother. She hugs her children, protects them from heat and cold, snow and rain. It's an old Lakota saying. There was another Lakota flying hawk. When asked why he preferred to live in a teepee rather than a house, he gave these words. The teepee is much better to live in. It's always clean, it's warm in the winter, cool in summer, easy to move. The white man builds a big house, costs much money, like big cage, shut out sun, can never move, you're always sick. Now, if you've ever stayed in a teepee, that'll ring home a little more than you'd think. Most of your teepees were used in this area. They were Plains Indians. They were nomadic tribes, and as a necessity, they had to move to follow the food source, the buffalo generally. These are marked, the triangles are a three-pole tripod type of teepee, and the few squares in here, the Ute, Comanche, and Hidatsa, they used a different type. They used a four-pole tripod. They used two sticks, stacked them together, wrapped them up, and ran guy wires. That one was not as common because it wasn't as sturdy. It wasn't built. Your teepee is built to withstand winds in the area. Now, in the beginning, back before the white man showed up, all of your teepees were made out of buffalo hides. Now, they were tanned, so they're not as heavy as what you would pick up and carry. All the hair was gone, and it was more like a buckskin. It was almost a material. But due to the weight and having to transport these all the time, most of them were 14 feet max, 12 foot, down smaller. If there's just a few people in there, it doesn't take much teepee. It may be a little short, but you've got lots of room around the bottom to put all your stuff. You spend most of your time outside. Now, guys, I got some bad news for you. The women owned the teepee. Now, it's like, come on, guys. Now, just because they tanned the hides, they sewed them together, they trimmed the poles, they put it up, they took it down, they packed it, they moved it, they decided where to set it up, they think they own it. Now, come on. We killed the buffalo and we cut down the trees for them. What more do they want, But, there was one other thing. Since women owned the lodge, if you pissed her off, all she had to do to divorce you was just set your stuff outside the door. She's done with you. And that was it. You might as well just go find your own. Not all Native Americans did live in teepees. There was various different dwellings that they used all over the place. I'm sure everybody's familiar with the cliff dwellings in the Pueblos. This is a Tlingit clan house. I have trouble saying that. That is the Pacific Northwest. They built log houses because it was always raining, and it was cold, and it was damp, and they would stay dry. The long houses were more along into the eastern coast. They weren't as wet, but it was colder, and they stayed real warm. Now, the teepee is not just a straight-up cone. It's not like an ice cream cone. You don't just take an ice cream cone, set up, nice, pretty round thing. It's actually a tilted cone. This side here is your door side, and it's what generally faces east. This is your long side. This side stands up straighter than this side because most of your prevailing winds in this area come out of the west. It's designed so, imagine standing a piece of plywood up and propping it up. That would be the most secure way to brace that west wall. If you turned it the other way where your prevailing winds were coming from this side, it'd just blow over. Now, there is a tradition on why you face most of your teepees east. The teepee of first man and first woman was pitched with the door facing east. Each day, they woke up to see morning star rising and were greeted by sun's first yellow rays shining through the smoke hole and the door, filling their lodge with holy light. That's the tradition for facing it east. But unless you're a ceremonial lodge, which generally has set in stone, has to be facing east, most of the time you would just face it with the back facing the wind that was coming. So sometimes the door could face southeast. You know, if you had a nice warm wind north out of the wind, it would face south. But that is the reason for the tilt. If you'll notice over here, some of these they just don't even look like cones. When y'all get through, you can look at those. Those are actually scale models of a 12-foot teepee, and the dark poles are your tripods. Now, part of being tilted allows the fire, when it's built in it, to be built into the center of the lodge, but it places it directly under the smoke hole. Your smoke can rise directly up and go straight outside rather than getting tangled up into the poles. These are your parts of a teepee. Everybody knows what poles are, and this is a cover. These are known as smoke flaps. We'll get to those. They have a very specific purpose. You have your door. These are lacing pins where the cover is tied together. Inside, you have a liner on the inside. Most of the time, they're about 6 foot tall. They're tied to the poles, and it's a very important piece. That is what helps the teepee operate like it should. And now we're going to get into some construction here. Just like any house, the most important part of a house is your foundation. When you're building a teepee, this is your foundation. This is the tripod. This is a Cheyenne style, and it is a 3-pole teepee. When we talked about the 4-pole, they basically have 2 of these back north and south poles put together. This teepee, this is the strongest design that they have come across. I mean, the tripod is sturdy from any direction. With this door pole, this is your east pole, sets out farther, then it braces these 2 back poles. It helps it stand up in the wind. If this is not tied in the right spot, tied the right way, your poles will either start slipping down each other and all 3 poles will just collapse on themselves. Or if you don't have the right distances in some of them, your cover won't fit right. If the wind blows from the wrong ways, it will blow them over. When they're put up right, you can't push them over. If they're not right, keep the cats off of them. This is the proper way to tie a tripod. When you're setting up your tripod, you lay your cover out on the ground so it's one side and full open. All of your poles are labeled. You have a north pole, a south pole, and a door pole, sometimes known as the east pole. You place your north and south pole right dead center of the cover. Leave some room down here at the bottom. All teepees need an air gap at the bottom, 4 to 6 inches at the bottom. Now, when you get these laid, you measure from this point back down to where they cross. It doesn't matter how you measure it. You don't have to measure it in feet. You can measure it with footsteps. You can measure with Snicker wrappers. It doesn't matter. As long as you can get a number there, you divide that by 3 and you place your door pole 1/3 of the distance here. So it's 2/3 here, 1/3 up at the top. That gives you your proper slope, and it actually will fit the cover. Just don't forget to leave a little bit down here like you did on the north-south poles. Once you get them tied together, you use a clove hitch to tie them across. The door pole lays on top of the north and south poles. Little clove hitch, not that complicated, throws me every time. I have to sit there and think about it. When you tie it, it takes about 45 feet of rope to do a teepee. A little more if you have larger teepees, merely for the distance from the knot down to the ground. But most teepees, 45 feet, is sufficient for what you need to do. When you tie your tripod, one side of the rope, you want to leave about 6 feet off. All the rest, the other 40 feet, just throw on the ground over here after you tie your knot. You take that 6 feet that you had, just wrap it around, just to lace it all up, just tie it off on one of the poles. And when you get ready to lay it out, once you have them tied, you place it in the position you want to place it in. You'll have a general idea which way's east and all. This is your door pole, your longest one. It places here. Where those poles sit will be the proper distance from your door pole to your south pole. This is a 12-foot. If you'll notice, there's only 3 poles in between your tripod. Above that, you go to 4 poles. From all of the 14 foot to about 20 feet, 22 feet. Then they actually have a 5th pole in there from 25 and 28 feet. Now to stand these up, remember that 40 feet of rope you had left over. You'll walk over, you grab the rope, you stand over here where the north and south pole go together, put your foot right there and grab hold of the rope and start pulling. Now if you've got an assistant, they should get up under the knot, pick the whole tripod up and just start walking towards you. When your TP gets about halfway as high as you think it ought to be, you grab this north pole, which is the one that's on the back side, and you swing it over into position. It doesn't have to be set right the first time. Just when you stand it up, just to hold the teepee up. Once you can turn loose the rope, you take it and you set it in place. When you get done with that and you get it up, you start laying your poles in. These poles, you just let your rope dangle on the center, and then you start placing these poles in. Very important on the order and the position you place these in. If you don't do it right, the top of your teepee, the sticks come out, will look like a bird's nest. Your cover won't fit right because your cover is designed to go around all of these poles. You'll start at the door pole, your east pole, and you lay the first pole up here. Well, when you stand these 2 poles up, you split your north and south pole, they form a cross, and it actually leans forward towards the door pole. You start with your number 1 pole and you lay it in that crotch over against one side. And you work from there back, the laying on. Now you get up in some of these 4 and 5 pole spreads. Your pole, when it comes up over your north pole, is going to be very close to the end. Sometimes it's not that easy to keep it up there. Once you get this side down, you start on this other side, you do the same thing, same order. Start at the door pole and work your way back. That gives you your nice, what we call a war bonnet look at the top of it. Nice and pretty. Sometimes you have to wiggle the poles and get them around. Once you have these poles put in, you put in your 2 of your back poles. Now on the 12-foot TP, since there's only 3 poles, you put your 8, 7, and 8 pole in there, in between the 2, and then you tie it. On the larger ones, you put the 2 on the north side and 1 on the south side. The remaining pole here is your lift pole. That's how you get your cover put up there. When you, after you've got all your poles put in, you take that 46-foot section of rope that you'd left dangling, you carry it out of the north or the south pole, in between the door pole and the south pole. Let me back that up one. You will carry, the rope will dangle here, you'll carry it outside the teepee here, and you walk around the lodge 4 times with that rope. As you go along, you just kind of give it a little flip, and that rope will naturally come into the smallest part of your teepee, your tripod. Once you've gone around 4 times is a sacred number in Native American. You bring your pole, you bring your rope right back around the north pole this time, back inside the lodge and let it dangle. Now, if you're using a storm tie, which we'll get into later, you just leave it. If you're not, you'll just tie it around the north pole and tie it off. Keeps it out of the center of the teepee. Storm ties are generally used when you know there's going to be a lot of wind or storms or something coming from different directions. At that point, you will pull that center rope that you've got, pull it straight down, put your 2 stakes in the ground in a cross. And you can tie that rope around it, and when it pulls, it'll try to pull them 2 stakes out together. It won't pull something straight up. You would be surprised how much just that rope holds that teepee down. Because it's all tied to all the poles. The more you pull it down, the tighter they get into the ground. Makes it really, really sturdy. To get the cover up, you lay that last remaining pole you had, which is called your lift pole. Generally, when you first start setting one up, you will take your 3 sturdiest poles, make your tripod out of. You take your 2 lightest, shortest poles for your smoke flaps, and you take the heaviest pole you've got for your lift pole. Because of a necessity, that cover weighs quite a bit. And angles and all, believe me, that's the hardest part of this whole situation. Lay your pole down, take the cover, and you lay the cover over that pole just like it was the north-south pole. Leave an air gap down at the bottom, and you tie the cover to that one pole. Once you have that cover tied to the pole, you just kind of gather it up onto the pole. Don't fold it, don't roll it, just do this with it. Your smoke flaps have ropes coming off of them. You take those 2 ropes and you just give it some big whaps around there. Just keep the cover from swinging down. Then it usually takes 2 people to get it up. You'll have somebody here standing in place with their foot against the bottom of the pole while the other person walks it up. You always put that pole where you want it in with your poles so you don't have to move it much. Set it up and you'll see the remaining space in the crotch for where it goes. Once you've got it put up in there, you just kind of unwind your smoke poles and grab it, and you pull both sides of the cover around to the east. You start putting your lacing pins in at that point. Yeah. When you first tie it, there is a ribbon at the bottom of your smoke poles here. It's your first tie. That pulls the cover together, and it makes it easier to put all your lacing pins in from there on down. TPs are always laced, left side laying over right. The pegs are put in, right side going to the left. They go in, both sides are slotted, push your pin in, pull it across, pull it out. Work your way from the top down. Don't worry about how loose it is. If you see I'm pushing this up, give her some slack. Makes it a lot easier to do it. That cover will tighten up later. Now once you get all of it laced in, you go back inside, and all of these poles that are not your original tripod pole, you pull them out against the cover. You don't pull them out tight, you just want to get your shape of your cover with your poles. Once you have your poles in place, you go through and stake the bottom of the tent, your cover here. That's when you pull all your wrinkles out. Don't worry about trying to pull it straight down against the poles. You want to pull it so it is smooth from the bottom clear up to your war bonnet. Get all those straight, get back inside, you kick your poles out again until it looks nice and pretty. Then you install a liner. The liner is one of the most important parts of these teepees. Other than that, you just have some shade. Teepees will work. Everything will operate like it should. They'll still draw smoke, but they're not efficient. You place a liner in these. The first thing you do is you wrap a rope around the inside of your poles. You bring the pole from the inside around between the cover and the pole, and you go back this way. About 6 feet up. You can measure, hold your liner up and measure where you would need your rope. When it goes around poles, place 2 sticks in there. Now, there's a reason for that. Doesn't matter what kind of teepee you have, tent, anybody that's ever tented in the rain knows you touch that cover, you're going to get wet. All of the poles touch the cover. Consequently, all of the poles will get water on them. When the water runs in, it's going to want to run to the underside of the pole and run down the underside of the pole. That is the reason you want really smooth poles. Because it hits a knot or a little stick sticking out, you've got a drip. Same thing would happen if you didn't put these sticks in here. These sticks allow the water to run behind your liner rope, continue on down the pole to the ground. Take it away from the inside. Keeps you drier. When you put your liner up, you tie it to this rope, and it has ties at the bottom. Sometimes the ties match up with the bottoms of the poles. Sometimes they don't. Generally, I'll run a second liner rope around the bottom of the poles, and it helps hold the TP in place and all. And it runs down. Now your liners, the bottom of your liner will have 6-8 foot of excess between the lower tie and the bottom of the liner. You take that excess and you curl it under into your TP. Now on top of that, you place your ground cloth, and that will actually shut out all the drafts in the teepee. That makes those things warmer in the winter, and it'll actually make it cooler in the summer because of the way that the airflow goes through this. Now, this is how your liner works. You notice your outside of your cover is up off the ground 6 or 8 inches. Your airflow will actually come in under that cover, but with your lining curled under your ground cloth, you can't get any draft where you're staying down in here. It'll pull it up through, help draw the smoke right out the smoke flap poles. It keeps in the summertime, because you have this air gap here, you don't have the radiant heat from the outside of the cover. You've got a little bit of that air gap in there, and with that air constantly moving between the liner and the cover, keeps your cover drier, keeps your cover from transferring heat into the liner, into the center of the teepee. That's why it's so important. That liner is what makes the teepee just a gorgeous place to stay. Because where else can you build a fire in your living room? In the middle of your living room. The liners are also known as ghost screens too. Years back, if you had a fire on the inside and it was at night, if you didn't have a liner, you had shadows on the cover on the outside. Your enemies could sneak up, say, well, there's 2 braves, and they would know what's going. With the liner in there, your shadow's cast on the liner and it doesn't go clear through to the cover. So your enemies could not pick out how many people are in there. They don't know if there's a whole bunch of y'all in there just waiting on, come on in here. Smoke flaps. Smoke flaps make a teepee draw. These smoke flaps here, when you put in your poles like this, they direct the wind away from your smoke hole. Now, if it's just pouring cats and dogs, and it looks like you're going to be washed plumb out of it, you close the flaps altogether. They'll come right across, your cover will be all the way up, you'll have a hole about this big in the top of your cover where all your poles come out. But because of the way everything's laying and the way the poles are laced, no rain falls directly down. If it did, it would fall just into your fire, but it won't even drip. Any rain that gets on your poles and starts running down your poles runs down the outside of your poles, outside of your liner. So you can sit in one of these in a thunderstorm just as dry as you want. This, call it 40 degrees above sweltering. If it's really hot, you pull your liner away, you just roll up the sides, and you let the whole thing just suck air through. That way you do have your drafts, which you don't want in the winter, but in the summer they're nice, and it'll draft on out. Now they're also used when wind direction. The way these are set up, the wind is coming from this direction. You always tilt your flaps away from the wind. The wind will come up over it, helps create a vacuum between the 2 flaps, and helps your teepee draw. Now, back in the days, the young girls of a lodge, it was their job, their chore, to adjust all the smoke flaps, to keep the smoke out of the teepee, keep the teepee from getting smoky or start the fires. Well, they're just like today's teenage girls. You don't allow them out after dark. Now, if one of those girls, though, she knew her boyfriend was kind of hanging around outside, she'd tell her family, well, it seems a little smoky in here. I think I need to go out and adjust the flaps. This is, it's a generic layout for the inside of the teepee. The headman and his principal wife, now I'm not real sure how many wives we could have, but the headman and his principal wives would sleep on the west side, on the opposite of the side of the fire from the door. The children and his secondary wives were to the left of the door, and any young men were to the right of the door. The young men stayed to the right of the door in case there was any problems out there. It was easy for them to get out to defend. The women and the children stayed to the left side of the door because the woman would always place her firewood, her cooking supplies, all of her tools, anything she needed to use to the left of the door, just inside. She could get up, she could go in the teepee, she could take care of what she needed to, get her pots, pans, some more jerky, whatever she needed, and not disturb everybody in the teepee. Now, generally, firewood wasn't kept inside the teepee unless you knew it was going to rain, or there was kindling kept in there if you thought there was going to be a heavy dew for the night. But most of the time, they were placed just outside the door. Easy to get to, but if it started raining, inside it could come. You could build your fire on the inside. The fires on the inside of the teepees weren't always used for cooking. They were more for heat and light in the evenings. They had another fire outside that when it was nice, they would use out there. You could build a bigger fire. You could build a hotter fire. You could roast more without making the teepee smell like elk grease, you know. But the fire on the inside was very important. If it was raining, you couldn't get to your outside, then you could cook from the inside. You build a real small fire, because in a teepee, a small fire goes a long ways. You build them as small as you can. You'll have enough light. You keep them fed just barely. You don't want them to smoke. You'll end up with lots of heat, just what light you need, and you would be surprised how comfortable it could be. I had a friend of mine, I lived in Bailey. He lived in my front yard for 2 years, winter and summer. He loved it. He said it was the best experience he had ever had. These are just some common measurements. I've just kind of went through in the teepee sizes here. This is the knot where you tie your tripod to the bottom of your pole. Makes it easier. That way you don't have to lay your cover out, put your north-south pole on there, go through that whole rigmarole to tie your tripod tight. These will give you, when you set it up, this is the distance between the poles. South to door, and south to north. If you'll notice, it's always the same to the door, but north and south are not as far apart. That is part of the reason that teepees actually have an egg shape to them. Well, that's it, people. Thank you, thank you. Y'all are welcome. You're welcome to come look at these teepees. They are a scale model of a 12-foot teepee. I have one with a cover, one without, because I know the pole placement is the hardest part. My tripod poles are the dark ones, and I did include a storm tie in them. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. We usually get ours from Colorado Yurt. They're in Montrose, I believe, and they're generally good about delivery. They also have poles. On mine, I have a 28-foot teepee up by Cripple Creek, and those poles are cut. Yes, it's a very large teepee. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, ma'am. They have liners. They have ozons. Ozons are not really used a lot. Let's see if I can get the ozone here. They actually have these too. That is just an additional rain shield. But if you do your teepee right and you got your liner in there right, that's unnecessary. Anybody else got something I can fake like I'm answering? No, most of them are smaller. You wouldn't believe how big a 28 foot is. We put a queen size bed in there and it looked like an army cot. Okay? Because you have to remember it is 28 foot across. It is almost the size of this room. And you can put a lot of people in there. You put them around the outside because when you put your bed up or your cot or your backrest, whatever you need, there's always that room. If you were setting up, there's always about this much room between you and where the liner stops. That's where you kept your storage. So you could put a lot of people around there. And around that 28-foot teepee, if I put everybody against the walls, I could probably put 10 or 15 people in there. Easy to sleep. They would have room for all of their stuff, and we could still have a fire in the center. Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Now, are you sure? No, they would either small child up on their shoulders to put these upper pins in and do the tie, or before you put the cover on, you tie sticks between your door pole and your first pole to make you a ladder. Or if you were short of sticks, you could just tie ropes in between them and give you a rope ladder up in there. Most of your teepees are not that tall. A little ladder like this is plenty, but I haven't tried doing it the old school way yet. I did use a wood ladder one time, though. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I put that one up, I take it down, and that's the one I had to start off with. It's actually a little fun little project, and next year when I put it up, I will do it that way. We're going to try to send out a blanket email so everybody that wants to can come watch help, and I'll basically tell you what I'm doing the whole time I am doing it. Sometimes it takes a little bit of wiggling around to get it just right because I like to make this one as perfect as I can. And it's like last year when I put it up, I put the cover up, put it all together, took the cover back off, all the poles out, rearranged my tripod, put it all back up again. Then it came out looking nice, or as nice as I wanted to accept. Yes, sir. Canvas is used now. When the white man came, they changed from buffalo hide to canvas. It was lighter. And to transport these, most of the times they would take two of your teepee poles, make a travoy, and either pull it with dogs or horses, and they would pack everything up on there. But canvas allowed them to go from 12 or 14-foot poles to the 28-foot monsters we see today. Common size? Oh, the floor material, they used buffalo hide. You know, you go out, you got 100 buffalo hides. So, buffalo hide was plenty back in there. So it didn't matter if they got wet, rotted, laying on the floor. They could just toss them or recycle them because they would take their old skins and stuff and make like storage satchels called parfleches. And, they wasted nothing. Even if your buffalo hide had a rotten spot on it, they'd cut it off, make decorations, make streamers, just do whatever they had left over. They were ultimate recyclers. Yes, ma'am. We take the cover off in the winter. I leave, yes, ma'am. I leave the poles up because it's better for your poles to stand up. If you lay them down, lay them up against something too strong, next year you come out, you build wiki ups instead of teepees. The best way to store your poles is either laying flat on the ground, well, on some cross pieces to keep them off of the dirt, and put those about every 2 feet because your poles won't do. Go out once a month or so, roll everything over just to keep it going. Other than that, find you a tree, stand them up as straight as you can in there, and leave them like that. The designs on the outside of the lodge were actually dictated by the man. They were either representations of visions they had, either through vision quests or just significant events. They commemorated something. They weren't just designs. Somebody didn't just go out and paint flowers on their teepee. If there was buffalo on there, he had a vision about buffalo, or that was commemorating a large kill or an excellent year or something. These over here, the one we've got decorated here, it's not a vision. It's just merely for some examples. Ours, the brown dots around the bottom are the rocks. The red lines signifies the red earth. And we have bear tracks on there because my cabin's been broke into 3 times by a bear. We also have 7 stars around it to represent some of the constellations, and the blue is for the sky. Now sometimes you'll see them painted black at the top. That's for the heavens. So all of the designs actually mean something. If you can see them and look at them, you'll have a general idea of at least what it's about. The only one I haven't really understood was one that was totally polka dot. It was covered with polka dots. It was white lodge with red polka dots. Come to find out, the man had a vision. He was having trouble finding meat for his family. So one day he was out and he went on a vision quest. He said, I've got to find a buffalo. During his vision, man came to him and says, copy my lodge. He took him and showed him his lodge. Says, copy my lodge. You will never be without buffalo. It was polka dots. Man asked him, what is the significance? He says, that's buffalo dung. If you see that much buffalo dung, there's buffalo. All right. You got another question? Well, not a lot of teepees were decorated. It's not like in the westerns you see where every teepee was decorated. They weren't decorated unless a man actually had a vision. View it as a commemorative plaque for something. That's what the decorations were for. So you might see a village, might only have 1 or 2. It might only have the ceremonial teepees painted because of your different clans and your different ceremonies. They would have smaller ceremonial teepees, and they would be decorated in a certain theme, so you would know. Mm-hmm. I've got a book over there. You might look. I do have books over here, and no, not that. Thank you. This one right here. This is the Bible. This was written in 1957 by some people. The Lobbins, and this is how I learned to do it 25 years ago. Because I bought a teepee at a garage sale. The guy sold me a sack of canvas and a bunch of poles. And said, good luck. Well, I did a bunch of research, and back when I bought it, we were pre-internet. So books were still a thing. And I've had this book ever since, but I highly recommend it. We also have some more teepee books up there in the front from our gift shop, and several of them I have used. So there's information, but you can look at one of the other ones I have. Sir. They were sewn together with sinew. That's sinew, or you made buffalo laces, like you do leather laces. You just split off little pieces of lace, get them wet, you stretch them, and they make laces, and they would sew them together with that. This was all we had iron and all, but you didn't have sewing needles, and they weren't bringing you cotton yarn and stuff. Most of their non-hide pieces were all natural. Yucca ropes is what they used in this area. They would braid yucca fibers. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Oh, you hang different things. Well, yeah, if it was, they say if he had a vision or it was commemorative teepee, yes, they would hang scalps up. they would hang pelts up just as an emblem more than anything. A lot of people put streamers up on them now. Streamers look pretty, but streamers were not really that common. They were more, they would hang a fetish up there. They'd hang a badger skin or something from the pole, just as trophies more than anything. Your liners, if your teepee, around the outside of the teepee, if you're in a really bad spot where it's going to be running on you, you do dig a trench. And most of the time you'll dig your trench so it catches it from the outside, stops stuff from coming in, rather than from your cover. If you dig it inside your cover, so anything that drips off that edge or drop down in it, it'll end up flooding your liner. So you want to dig your trench on the outside and you pile a little bit of dirt up. Not on the covers. You can, most of the time, rather than waterproof the cover because it'll stiffen them up, changes the colors, you buy a heavier canvas, and some of them are treated already. A lot of your waterproofings will stain your cover a light tan, makes it harder to get decorations on it and stuff, and it's not as pretty looking as a pristine white teepee sitting out in the middle of a field, you know. Yes, ma'am. No, it purely depended on the size of the tribe. Now, generally, families were together. In fact, when a young couple first got married, they would live with one of the other parents until they got their teepee made for themselves. Generally, they would start off in the man's family's teepee, whether it was same village or not, start there, and then they would move to the woman's family. Now, generally, ma-in-law had enough of him, so she would make the daughter build her own teepee and get out of my house. But anything else? All right, I covered y'all up with enough of it. Thanks for coming.